Okay, I'm gonna do the best I can to do these notes. The first thing I want you to understand that these are rational numbers, and rational numbers are whole numbers, decimals, and fractions. So we're gonna be dealing with decimals and fractions in this as well. We're gonna be talking about adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. Today we're just gonna focus on the rules and remembering how to do that, and then starting tomorrow and the rest of the week, you guys will be working on actually number crunching and doing the operations. So the first thing I want to talk about is adding and subtracting. Now, adding and subtracting typically have the same rule for signs. So we're going to kind of combine those together. We have two options. We can either have same signs. And if we have same signs, what we do is we add and keep the sign. So if we have two negatives added together, we just add them and keep the sign. If we have two positives being added together, then we keep them and add them and keep the sign. Now another option, if it's not the same signs, they could be different signs. And if we have that, then we don't add and keep the sign. We actually do the opposite, where we subtract the two numbers and take. We say subtract and take a lot in class, but what we actually mean is subtract and take the sign of the larger number. Subtract and take the sign of the larger number. Okay, so when we're adding decimals, it's extremely important that we line up the decimals. We must line up decimal. We have to. We have no choice but when we're adding. So for example, if we have the whole number 6 plus the decimal 0.43, we don't add 43 plus 6 like this. We do not do that. What we have to do is we have to make 6 a decimal, like so. And then we line up that decimal here, like this. And then we add those together. Notice how my decimal is lined up like so. Okay, and then for fractions we have to get a common denominator. We have to. We have no way around that. When we're adding fractions, we need a common denominator. And I'll explain how you find a common denominator in a video later on, but for now, we just need to know that we need a common denominator. Whenever we add fractions, we want the larger number at the top. And we need to be aware that we may have to reduce. Okay? Now, let's move on to subtracting. Now, the good thing about subtracting, the rules for the signs are the same. So we're just going to put an arrow to show that they're the same. Also, the rule for decimals when we're subtracting is also the same. We have to make sure we line up our decimals. So instead of this being adding, we could just put a subtraction sign. We still have to line up the decimals the same. Now, fractions, for the most part, they're the same, but we may have to borrow. We may have to borrow, and that can get kind of complicated, but I'll show you an example later on. So you can put an arrow down here, but just be aware that you may have to borrow. All right, now let's move on to multiplication. Multiplying and dividing are a little bit more less complicated. So in order to find the rule for the sign, for if it's an addition or if it's a negative or a positive sign as our answer, we use what's called sleeping man. And it looks like this, circle with the lines here, and we put negatives in for the eyes and a positive for the mouth, so it looks like it's sleeping. So if we have a negative and a negative being multiplied together, we would cover them up with our fingers like so. And our answer would be positive. If we have a positive and a negative being multiplied together, we would cover those two up and our answer would end up being negative. Now when we move on to decimals, this is a little bit different. In fact, we don't line up the decimals whenever we're multiplying. In fact, what we want to do is just pretend like they're not even there, so we're just going to